Hello all of my history-loving friends. Welcome to the world of Madame Morbid. This is a history channel. I talk about any number of historic topics, many of which have a darker tone to them, but not all. If you like what you see today, please like the video, please subscribe to my channel, please watch the whole thing. That helps me more than anything. Today we are not talking about a dark topic. Actually, today is a really fun one. I'm going to tell you all about Elvis Presley and what he did when he was in Springfield that night in 1956 when he appeared right here at the Shrine Mosque located behind me. The shrine was built in 1923. It's coming up on its 100th anniversary. It has hosted some of the greatest performing artists in history. When it was built in 1923, the stage was the largest stage in the United States, second only to the Metropolitan Opera in New York City. That's pretty impressive. Elvis was here in May. He was on tour with Colonel Tom Parker, and the one incident I really want to tell you about involves an 11-year-old boy who sought him out in his dressing room, and I want to tell you all about that interaction and what ultimately happened between that boy and Elvis Presley later on in both of their lives. When Elvis came to Springfield, it was really early in his career. He had become established with the Colonel, and he was basically on his first major tour, but he'd been on television several times, and an 11-year-old boy in Springfield had seen him on TV. He saw him on Louisiana Hayride, in which he appeared in October of 1955. It was mostly a radio show, but they showed clips of Elvis performing during the broadcast. And this young man was this young boy was somewhat of a musical prodigy. He said his grandmother used to take him to the Gillioz Theatre to see live gospel shows and country shows. His father was a singer. He could figure stuff out if he could hear it. And he used to watch these fabulous guitar players, and he would go home and he would try to duplicate what he had seen them do. He taught himself how to play, and he could play by ear. At this point, he's 11 years old, and he's a really fabulous guitar player. And he sees Elvis on the hayride. And he said Elvis had a Martin D18, which is one of the best guitars ever. And he said he was hitting it. Because at this point, Elvis did not have much of a band. He didn't have a drummer. He was not playing the guitar at the time, but he was just slapping it to the beat, as if it were a drum. He said it literally hurt his feelings to see Elvis hitting this amazing guitar that he would have given anything to have, but couldn't afford to have. And he just made up his mind, if I ever meet him, I'm going to tell him he is a terrible guitar player. A few months later, the Springfield newspapers start advertising that Elvis has been scheduled to play at the Shrine on May 17th. One night only, one show only. And he decides, oh my gosh, that's a great opportunity for me to track him down and tell him this. Elvis, and presumably anybody in his entourage or associated with the tour, was put up at the Rail Haven Motel. Now, between 1930 and 1950s, the Rail Haven was the place to stay on Route 66. It's located at the intersection of St. Louis Street and Glenstone. Elvis stayed in room 409. As you can see, room 409 has been decorated to celebrate Elvis and his 1956 visit and I guess one night stay in this motel. I think my favorite thing about this room is the taillights on the car are hooked up with the main light switch. So if you turn off the lights, you turn off the taillights and vice versa. It's pretty fun how behind the bed you can see it's a drive-in theater showing one of Elvis's movies too. May 17th, the afternoon of the performance, Elvis needed to get away. He noticed if you step outside of the shrine, down the street there was a blade sign for the Gillioz. Now that sign isn't there anymore,
but when I got a tour of the theater, they told me they are looking into getting that placed back on the theater. Elvis saw this sign and walked down the street to go to a movie. He did this all the time. It was a way to get away for a little bit, to sit somewhere dark. The movie being shown was called Jubal. It was a Western. It starred Glenn Ford, Rod Steiger, Ernest Borgnine. They let me into the Gillioz to see Elvis's seat. Now, I don't know how they know that this is the seat. It does make sense based on where it's located. He just bought a ticket, slipped in the back, and sat in the very back row right next to the door. As it became time to do a dress rehearsal and a sound check, they started looking for Elvis and they couldn't find him. And somebody asked the colonel, "Where's Elvis? We can't find him anywhere." And the colonel asked if there was a movie theater nearby, and somebody said, "Yeah, just down the street, there's the Gillioz." And the colonel said, "Well, that's where he'll be." They came in through this door. They saw Elvis sitting there, and they said, "Elvis, come on, you gotta come back to the shrine, man. We gotta do a sound check. We gotta get ready for the show." And they walked him back. On the weekend that Elvis played, the boys' parents decided to leave town. They had a little cabin by the Finley River, and they left him home. And he thought, oh, it's my chance. One of the radio stations in Springfield announces that Elvis is in town. He is at the shrine right now, and they're gonna be doing their sound check soon. Now, you're not invited to that, folks, but for the 13th caller, I've got 2 free tickets. He was very familiar with the building. He had done a show there as part of the Kiwanis Club with his father. He knew where the dressing rooms were. By this time, Elvis had been located at the Gillioz. They had fetched him and they had gotten him back to the shrine. I'm somewhat guessing here on the timeline because no one could really tell me exactly how it worked out. I'm just assuming the Gillioz happened first, but I could be wrong about that. Because his father was a professor at Southwest Missouri State, they lived really close to campus, which is also really close to the shrine. He rode his bike to the shrine and he parked out back. I'm going to assume he went in this door here, which is when I got a tour. This is the door I entered through. And he made his way back to the dressing room area. He makes it sound like he really didn't encounter anybody. There was just nobody around. There are many dressing rooms by the stage area, and they are on both sides of the stage, and they are also located on 2 floors, stage level and then the floor above that. All he has ever said is that he eventually found Elvis in the last room on the left. He says he had to look for a little bit to finally find him. The door was open 2 or 3 inches. As he's standing at the door, the young boy says he's thinking, do I have the guts to go through with this? Can I do this? And he ultimately decided, yes, I'm going to do this. So he knocked. The door swung open, and the young boy said, "You're Elvis Presley." And Elvis responded, "I know." He said, "Oh, well, okay, so he's not a hoodlum, he's a smart aleck." His parents had seen Elvis on TV as well, and were not keen on him seeing Elvis. He said they didn't think he was evil, or some people went that far, but he said they just didn't think he was a good role model for an impressionable boy. But he said he was definitely not the motorcycle riding hoodlum everyone kept talking about. He said he was very well kempt. His hair was neat and in place. He had on shiny shoes. He was wearing a white and red checkered Western shirt with a blue jean jacket on top and blue jean pants with very nice shoes. He had a 6-pack of Coke or Pepsi sitting on the table, and he also had a bag of burgers from somewhere for his lunch. He saw the boy in the doorway and greeted him, and he said he invited him in and asked him to sit down, and he started talking to him about his family, his parents, what they did, where he lived, if he was in school, just really nice, friendly, conversational stuff. The boy finally said, "Elvis, there's a reason I'm here to talk to you, and it's because I wanted to tell you
that you can't play the guitar worth a damn. He said Elvis got a little bit amused and said something like, "Oh, is that so? Well, do you think you can play better than me?" And the young boy responded, "I know I can." He said there was a Gibson guitar leaning up against the wall, and he asked Elvis, "Can I borrow your guitar?" And Elvis said, "Yeah, go ahead." So he took it and he started playing. It's actually a song designed for the banjo, Foggy Bottom. I'm going to have to double check the name of the song, Foggy Bottom something. And he said he played it, and he sang him a couple of songs. Elvis, when he was done, Elvis said, "You're pretty good." And he replied, "I know." And he said he was doing it as a comeback to the smart aleck remark when he first met him. Shortly after this, a couple of burly guys, he wasn't sure who they were, maybe bodyguards, maybe just stagehands, I don't know, but they were coming to get Elvis for the sound check, and they saw him there, and they said, "Hey kid, who are you? What are you doing here? You need to get out of here, you don't belong here." Elvis said, "Hey, you leave him alone. This is my friend John, and he just gave me a guitar lesson." But the boy figured it was probably time to move along. He had done what he came to do, and he said, "Elvis, I know you're really busy, so I'm just going to go home." And he said Elvis came up to him, called him back, and he came back, and he said Elvis put his hand on his shoulder and said, "You know what, kid? I just have a really strong feeling that we're going to see each other again. I don't really know why I feel that way, but I really do." And he said he told Elvis, "Well, you know, Mr. Presley, I really hope you're right about that." And he left, and he got on his bike, and he went home. I haven't heard much about how Elvis's show went that night, but I imagine it was probably similar to other shows he did in 1956. The girls probably went crazy, screaming their heads off at that jiggling pelvis. Other than advertising the show beforehand, the papers didn't talk about the show hardly at all, and when it was over, they didn't have a story about it at all. After this encounter, the young boy, I don't want to say he forgot about it. He certainly didn't think he would necessarily see Elvis again. He was more of a folk artist. He joined a group that based itself off of the Kingston Trio. They called themselves the Coachmen. There were actually 4 of them, though. He was the 4th addition to the group. And he said they did things like birthday parties, and they played pizza parlors and just small gigs around town. He started playing guitar when he was 5 years old and took up the banjo when he was 6. And he was really known for his picking. He was able to play the guitar like a banjo. And that's what he did for Elvis that night. It gave any band he played for a very distinctive sound. Later on in his career, he moved to LA. And one night, whatever band he was with at the time, they occasionally played the Whiskey A Go-Go. And this one evening, they got a call by the owner who said, the group that was supposed to open for Jefferson Airplane that night, this is the early 60s, was sick. Either one or more band members, and they were looking for a group to fill in. His band was offered the chance to do that, and he said he hung up, he called all the guys, and they said, "Sure, yeah, we'll do that." They showed up that night, and he noticed there was a special table roped off for a VIP of some sort, and he thought, "Oh wow, some bigwig is here to see Jefferson Airplane." And he did his set, and he said afterward he went back to his dressing room. He thought it went really well, and he was sitting at his table, either removing makeup or just gathering his thoughts after the show, when this huge hulking figure showed up in his doorway. And it was a big guy they called Chief. He was a big Native American bodyguard of Elvis, but he didn't know who he was or why he was there. He was afraid that during the show he had done something to offend somebody and was about to get his butt whipped. He said this big guy is standing there, and he goes, "Someone needs to see you right now." He didn't say who, and he thinks, "Oh God, I'm gonna die. I don't know what I've done, but I've made somebody mad." He said, "Well, can I at least change clothes?" "Yeah, sure, go ahead." He held up his guitar and he said, what do I do with this?" And the guy said, "I'll take it." And he took his guitar and just disappeared. What he had done, he had gone and he had put it in the vehicle. And he came back. He went with him. I'm thinking, man, if you're really thinking you're going to die, why are you willingly going with this guy? He takes him to that table where Elvis is sitting. Elvis stands up and he says, "Well, hello there, Johnny. "You're that kid that told me I couldn't play guitar, aren't you?" John said, "Yeah, that's me." And Elvis replied, "Well, I've got news for you. I still can't play guitar." He tells him to hand his keys to his friend Charlie. He said, "Come on out to my house. Let's play some music and listen to some gospel and just kind of visit a little while. You'll ride with me." He said Elvis was the worst driver he ever encountered. But they spent that evening together until 5 in the morning before Elvis finally said, "Well, I think I'll go to bed." He said, if I ever get to where I can get off of doing all of these dumb movies that the Colonel has me making, I want to get back in and I want to play again. I want to perform again. I want to make music. Someday I'm going to make a band. I want you to be a part of it. He never really thought that was a possibility, I don't think. He said I was a folk musician. I didn't really think Elvis would really want me in his band, but he responded, "Oh man, that would be great. I would love to see you going back and making music again." And it would be another 5-6 years before he heard from him again. And he got a telephone call this time. He was a huge Elvis fan. Yes, he really liked folk, but he loved Elvis. He was a genuine Elvis fan. And his friends had been known to make fun of him for this. And they had been known to call him and pretend to be Elvis and just mess with him. So he gets this phone call. This is around 1968. And he picks it up and he goes, "Hey, John, it's Elvis." And he goes, "Yeah, right, guys. Funny, real funny." And then he hangs up. He said a few seconds went by and the phone rang again. And he picked it up. And the person on the other end of the line said, "Don't hang up. Don't hang up. This is really Elvis Presley." And he proceeded to tell him, "I am putting together a band. I'm going to call it TCB, Taking Care of Business, and I need a rhythm guitar player." Basically, he wanted someone to take over the part Elvis usually played. During this stage of his career, the guitar was basically a prop, or he might bring it out for a minute, play a few bars, and then he would hand it off and the band would take over, and he would just focus on performing and singing for the audience that he loved. And that is the role John Wilkinson, the 11-year-old kid he had met in Springfield, Missouri, took on as part of the TCB Band. January 31st, 1969, Elvis placed the TCB necklace around his neck, and John Wilkinson never removed it after that day. He wore it for the whole rest of his life. It is now at the History Museum on the Square with one of the jumpsuits he wore on stage with Elvis. This song right here features John really heavily. I'm only going to play a tiny snippet of it, and even that may get me in trouble. This is Kentucky Rain, and this is an example of John playing the guitar like a banjo. And according to some experts, no one has ever duplicated the way John played.
And the rhythm guitar from Springfield, Missouri is John Wilkinson.
This song sounds so distinctive because of John. John Wilkinson played over 1,100 shows with Elvis as a member of the TCB Band. He was on every recording session, every concert from 1969 to 1977 when Elvis died. I read he never missed a show. Here's Elvis introducing John at the Aloha from Hawaii concert.
Rhythm guitar, John Wilkinson.
He did every show in Vegas, and he was here in June of 1977 playing at the Hammons Student Center the night Elvis played 2 months before his death. It's interesting to me that Elvis began his career somewhat in Springfield, and he played here again right before the end. The members of the band said they had to learn Elvis's body language because Elvis would do all of these karate moves. He would signal the end of songs or the beginning of new songs. Sometimes he would change his mind and just add a song out of the blue. He was known to take suggestions from people in the audience. If somebody in the front row asked for a song, he would play it sometimes. Someone at the museum pointed out to me, and I don't know why this hadn't hit my mind, In the movie Forrest Gump, which ironically the Gillioz was just showing, Elvis meets Forrest when he's a young boy, and Elvis shows him how he dances. And I agree, there's a pretty high likelihood that John Wilkinson's encounter with Elvis here at the Shrine Mosque may have inspired the scene in that movie. John Wilkinson has said many times in many interviews that second only to his father, Elvis was the kindest, most caring, most compassionate human being he ever knew on earth in his life. And I've heard that from so many people who were close to Elvis. He was generous to a fault. If he could help somebody, he would. Years later, Joe Esposito told him that Elvis had seen him on a television show, like a local LA-based show that he used to play and sing on, and remembered him. Now, this is years before tonight at the Whiskey A Go-Go. And he said, "That's that kid I met in Springfield, Missouri that told me I couldn't play guitar." When you really think about it, it's astonishing to me that he would not only remember John, but that he would recognize him on television 10 years later, 11-year-old kid to an adult, and he remembered him. And not only remembered him, but remembered where he knew him from. And he kept tabs on him. I don't know if he went to the Whiskey A Go-Go because he knew John's band was playing that night. Did he spend years thinking about the fact that he wanted to help this kid out as a musician, even all these years later? From what I know about him, it wouldn't surprise me. Wouldn't shock me at all to find that out. But it's one of the most inspiring and amazing stories I have ever heard. I'm here at Hazelwood Cemetery. Unfortunately, John Wilkinson passed away in 2013 at the age of 67. He had battled cancer for quite some time. After TCB, John Wilkinson really kind of went back to civilian life, civilian as in not a rock star. Just working in, he worked in aviation maybe, like worked in an airport or something. And in 1989, and this is extremely sad, he had a stroke. He could still talk fine and he could sing, but he lost the use of his left hand, and so he couldn't play anymore. But he kept a guitar the rest of his life in the hopes that someday maybe he would get that ability back. He did pass away in January of 2013 after battling cancer for 4 years. But he was still talking about Elvis. He went to Elvis Week at Graceland in 2011. And he was really entertaining when he gave interviews about Elvis. And there's some good ones online if you'd like to watch them, just on YouTube, including him talking about the talk he gave at Elvis Week in 2011. And there's also an appearance from the Mystery Hour, which was a local show here in Springfield that he appeared on in 2012. So probably months before he passed away. Which is sad because the host makes a comment, "Well, we've run out of time, but we'll have to have you back again." And of course, you know, he passed away. Well, thank you all for joining me today. I've had so much fun researching Elvis. I can honestly say I've become a bigger fan after learning more about him. The real Elvis, not the legend.